The two suns above Irask 4 burned without mercy, casting double shadows on the jagged ground and making the air shimmer like it was boiling. The desert moon was silent, save for the occasional howl of wind that whispered of something worse to come. Irask 4 was known for its unforgiving terrain, but today, that wasn't the real threat. The real danger was still hours away, and every cadet stationed on the moon knew it. A warning had echoed across the comm channels of the Intergalactic Survival Academy that morning. Class 7 Sandstorm projected to hit Sector 9A in approximately 12 hours. All cadets must construct and occupy storm-grade shelters by deadline. Failure to comply will result in automatic failure of field assessment. Panic followed. On the eastern ridge, alien cadets from at least 6 different species began working frantically. The Velkari twins, crystalline beings whose angular bodies shimmered like prisms, were already erecting their force dome, a lattice of microfilaments and electric mesh that buzzed in the dry air. To the west, a bulky reptilian cadet named Zorath uncoiled a rapid-deploy survival orb the size of a boulder. With a press of his scaly fingers, the orb hissed and unfolded into a glossy black capsule, complete with internal shock absorbers and filtered air systems. Down by the gully, a group of Corvan insectoids buzzed among themselves, working as a unit to assemble a collapsible hex shell that adjusted to wind speeds. Above them all, perched on a flat section of rock and watching with narrowed eyes, sat the lone human cadet, Liana Holt. She didn't move. Not at first. Not when the warning sounded. Not when the others started running. Not even when Zorath passed her, grunting, "Hope that human gear's better than it looks." He didn't wait for an answer. Liana had her knees pulled up to her chest, elbows resting on them, and a thin piece of reflective cloth draped across her shoulders. She looked small compared to the others. No armored plating, no protective shell, no cybernetic implants to increase her build speed. Just a canvas bag at her side, a utility belt, and a half-empty canteen. She watched as the others rushed to unpack their gear, shouting across the canyon in mixed dialects, ordering drones to assist, syncing build plans to shared holograms. It all looked like panic disguised as precision. She took a long breath through her nose and slowly stood up, brushing the dust from her pants. Her boots crunched against the sand-coated stone as she made her way down from her perch. She passed 3 different groups of cadets, all too busy with their own shelters to bother looking at her. Only one noticed, a purple-skinned Etherian with 6 glowing eyes who glanced up as she walked by, then returned to calibrating his shield generator. No one stopped her. No one asked what her plan was. That suited her just fine. Her grandfather had always said, "The moment you start building in panic, you're already failing the storm." Liana didn't open any survival pods. She didn't tap into any AI schematics. Instead, she wandered away from the crowd, scanning the ground with the casual curiosity of someone on a scavenger hunt. A few discarded supply crates lay half-buried in the sand near an old refueling station, one that hadn't been used in years. She kicked one crate open with the heel of her boot and smiled at what she found. Torn rope, bent tent rods, 2 steel plates, and a heap of sun-bleached fabric. It looked like someone's laundry had been abandoned long ago, stiff, brittle, and covered in dust. Perfect. She stuffed what she could into her bag and carried the rest under her arm as she walked further uphill to a natural dip between 2 jagged outcrops. The slope would act as a barrier against the incoming wind. The rocks would serve as anchor points. The rest was up to her. Hours passed. The sky began to change, subtly at first. The blue tinge of atmosphere darkened to a pale gold, then shifted toward rust. The double shadows shortened as the suns dipped. The air grew still, unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath. Alien cadets shouted across the camp, "6 hours until impact!" Generators hummed louder. Field domes were tested against simulations. Inside his capsule, Zorath performed a full systems check. The Corvans buzzed nervously, their antennae twitching. and on her side of the ridge, Liana tied two frayed ropes between the rocks, low to the ground. She layered the fabric she'd collected, not taut, but loose, so it could flap without tearing. She weighed it down with stones, stacked carefully in rows. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't symmetrical, but it was quiet work, purposeful. One alien cadet wandered past on a recon hoverboard, paused in midair, and stared down at her odd shelter. "What is that?" he asked, his translator spitting out a confused tone. "A bed," she replied flatly. He blinked, antennae twitching, then flew off without another word. The truth was, Liana didn't need to win beauty points. The storm didn't care how sleek your dome looked. The wind didn't care if your armor was polished. All it cared about was leverage and pressure and how well you blended in with the ground. Every single human who'd grown up in her family knew that. Her great-grandmother had survived flash floods by sleeping under bridges. Her uncle once rode out a blizzard inside a snowdrift. Her father taught her how to make a stove from a coffee tin and how to tell when the air was too quiet. But it was her grandmother who taught her to build shelter using nothing but laundry and rocks, and told her the secret wasn't in the strength of the materials, but in their give. "Let the wind pass around you," her grandmother used to say. "Don't fight it. Bend with it, break nothing, and you'll wake up warm." The countdown hit 4 hours. All cadets were now confined to their shelters. Emergency protocols were checked and confirmed. The command center on the orbiting Academy cruiser monitored each structure's signature from above. Liana didn't report in. She didn't need to. She'd finished her work early and lay curled beneath the overlapping fabrics, with her bag tucked behind her knees and a rock as her pillow. The entrance flap was pinned down with a triangular plate of metal, leaving just enough airflow to breathe without letting sand inside. Outside, the wind began to moan. A low, eerie hum rolled over the hills like a warning growl. Distant flashes on the horizon revealed the true face of the storm. A wall of dust hundreds of meters high, devouring light and dragging the sky with it. Liana tightened her hood around her head, pulled the cloth over her mouth, and smiled to herself in the dark. Let the others have their domes and capsules and sensor nets. She had laundry and rocks and everything her family ever taught her. And as the first howling gust slammed against the ridge with the fury of 1,000 voices, she closed her eyes and went to sleep. The storm had not ended, but the silence that followed its rage was louder than the wind itself. Dawn on Irask 4 did not arrive gently. It crept in hesitantly, casting a dusty orange haze across the desert as the wind choked on its last defiant breath. Slabs of twisted metal littered the plain. Shimmering fragments of torn shielding reflected the low sun like broken promises. And everywhere there was motion, it came slow and cautious. Alien cadets emerging one by one, dragging bruised limbs and scorched equipment from the ruins of what had once been considered superior survival technology. Liana had not yet stirred. Her shelter, built from laundry and weighted stones, still held firm. It looked almost humble against the wreckage scattered across the landscape, but it remained untouched. The stones had sunk deeper into the earth, the fabric now sealed with layers of fine sand, and the entrance flap rippled gently in the new morning breeze. Inside, Liana exhaled softly, still curled in the fetal position, her cheek pressed against her makeshift pillow of bundled cloth. Her breath was slow and warm. There was no urgency in her awakening, no fear clinging to her limbs. She felt the calm first, before opening her eyes, the kind of calm that came from knowing she had not been wrong. She stretched under the fabric, brushing away a layer of cool dust from her shoulder, and unpinned the flap. Sunlight streamed in at an angle, golden and hazy, and the sound of distant arguing rolled in with it. The first voices she recognized belonged to the Corvin triad, 3 insectoid brothers who rarely agreed on anything but currently shouted in perfect unison. She couldn't see them yet, but she knew the cadence. They were blaming the failure of their hex shell on each other's over-reliance on synchronized node points. It sounded ridiculous even now. Liana crawled out from beneath her shelter, her knees stiff and her throat dry. She pulled the canteen from her belt and sipped slowly, taking a moment to scan the chaos below. What she saw didn't surprise her, but the extent of it did. Zorath's survival capsule had been torn from its anchors and now lay upside down, half buried in a dune 30 meters from where it had been deployed. One of its stabilizers had snapped off entirely and left a skid trail behind it. The Velkari force dome had shattered mid-storm. Liana could see its filament wires tangled in a brittle bush, and one of the twins sat beside the wreckage with his translucent face in his hands, flickering in visible shame. The Etherean's shelter had fused shut when the static built up in the sand fried his shielding relay, trapping him inside until he burned through the back with an emergency torch. Only one structure still resembled a shelter. It was hers, and that was the problem. She stood and dusted off her pants, then began casually rolling up the fabric of her tent. There were no spectators yet, no applause. Only curious glances, darting and quick, filled with calculation. She felt them before she saw them. She could tell the moment the others realized she wasn't just alive. She had slept through it. She moved slowly, not because she was tired, but because she wanted them to see, wanted them to notice the lack of damage, the lack of stress. She didn't feel the need to explain anything, but she had learned long ago that silence sometimes screamed louder than any speech. A shadow fell across her. Zorath had limped uphill. His shoulders drooped, and his scales looked dull with fatigue. He stared at her shelter, now half disassembled and neatly folded on a clean patch of rock. He didn't say anything at first. Then, with a grunt, he asked, "What kind of human tech is that?" Liana didn't look up. She placed a rock into her pack, then knelt to retrieve the next one. "It's not tech." He squinted. "Then what is it?" She smiled to herself. "A memory." Zorath grunted again, but this time with less annoyance and more confusion. He stayed there a while, watching her pack every piece with care, like it was more valuable than any survival gear on the moon. Then he turned and limped away, dragging one clawed foot through the sand, muttering under his breath. A few moments later, the Corvin brothers arrived. Unlike Zorath, they didn't approach slowly. They swarmed around her, twitching with frustration, their chittering voices overlapping like a broken radio. That shelter violates structural expectations. It defied wind projection algorithms. It lacks a central spine, no gravity mesh. Liana stood, brushing her hands off on her shirt, and stared at the middle brother, the one who always thought he spoke for the others. "Maybe you're building for the wrong kind of storm." He froze. His antennae tilted in different directions. "What other kind is there?" She didn't answer. From behind her, another voice spoke, calm, low, and deeply curious. The Etherean cadet floated into view, translucent and weightless, his 6 eyes blinking at different speeds. "We studied 6 planetary wind patterns and 17 standard models for mobile shelter deployment," he said slowly. His words stretched as though each one needed to be examined before spoken. None of them suggested lying beneath bedsheets and sandbags. Liana shrugged. "That's why I didn't study them." His eyes pulsed a soft blue. "Then what did you study?" "People who didn't have manuals." There was a pause long enough to feel like judgment. Liana didn't flinch. She finished packing, hoisted the bag over her shoulder, and took one last look at the horizon. The storm had erased most of the landscape's detail, but her shelter's outline remained etched into the ground like a signature. Simple, balanced, undeniable. The Academy's dropship descended soon after, stirring up a fresh cloud of dust. As it landed, a sharp burst of static crackled over the cadets' comlinks, followed by a short announcement from the orbiting command cruiser. "Assessment complete. Debrief to follow. Prepare for extraction." The cadets gathered near the landing platform, many of them bruised, embarrassed, or silently angry. Zorath stood at the rear, arms crossed. The Corvin brothers fidgeted in place. The Velkari twins refused to look at anyone. Only Liana remained still, standing upright with her bag slung across her back, her hands in her pockets. An academy instructor stepped out of the shuttle and scanned the crowd. His armor bore the silver insignia of the Tactical Survival Division, and his expression was unreadable behind the mirrored visor of his helmet. He waited for silence. When none came, he created it with a single sentence. Only one cadet achieved full storm protection with 0 system failure. A ripple moved through the group. The instructor didn't name her yet, but all eyes turned toward her. Liana said nothing. The instructor continued. Debrief will be individualized. All cadets will submit build reports and incident logs. Debriefing priority will be assigned by survival rating, not technology score. He turned to face her directly. The helmet tilted downward, just slightly. Human Cadet Holt, report to the shuttle. First debriefing. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just walked forward, bag on her shoulder, steps steady, boots crunching against the cracked sand. As she passed the others, she heard whispers. She cheated. No, she just got lucky. She had some hidden equipment. She didn't even try to help us. But she also heard something else, a voice not spoken aloud, but held in the pause between every sentence. A question none of them wanted to ask. What if she didn't need any of this? What if she knew something we didn't? Liana stepped into the shuttle without looking back. The hatch hissed shut behind her, sealing out the dust and noise. Inside, the air was cool, the light sterile. The Academy's emblem rotated slowly on the central monitor. The instructor sat across from her and removed his helmet. His face was weathered, human like hers, with deep lines carved by time and sun. You knew it would work? She nodded. Why? She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Because I wasn't building for the storm. I was building for the morning after the instructor watched her for a long time. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. The shuttle rose from the surface of Irask 4 with a steady, silent thrust. Liana felt the familiar weight shift in her spine as gravity gave way to orbital float. The cabin lights shifted from amber to white as atmospheric interference cleared, and outside the narrow viewport, the desert moon quickly shrank into a swirling marble of dust and sunlight. The silence inside the transport was clean, clinical, and detached from the chaos below. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, letting the noise of the world fade into nothing. The instructor across from her had said nothing since their brief exchange. He sat perfectly still, his helmet resting in his lap, hands folded over it like a priest with a relic. His gaze was steady but not unkind. Liana recognized the type. Former field agents turned evaluators. Men who had seen more storms than cadets had exams. His eyes followed her not as a threat, but as a puzzle. When the shuttle docked with the main orbital station, there was no ceremony. The hangar lights flickered once overhead as the pressure equalized. The inner doors slid open with a soft sigh, and Liana stepped out into the debrief corridor. The walls were steel gray, lined with panels that glowed dimly as she passed. 2 service drones hovered to her right, carrying folded med kits and trays of steaming hydration capsules. Neither acknowledged her presence. Everything here was automated, efficient, cold. The instructor led her without speaking, guiding her down a narrow passage into a side chamber marked Observation Deck 7. The room was empty, save for a single table and 2 chairs. One wall displayed a massive holoscreen showing top-down storm telemetry data. Hundreds of red markers blinked with system failures. Only one green dot pulsed gently at the top, her identifier. She sat. The instructor remained standing. He didn't activate any recording equipment. Instead, he folded his arms and stared at the screen in silence for several moments, as though the data were whispering something only he could hear. Then he asked, "Why didn't you log your structure?" She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. There was nothing to log. Fabric, rope, and rocks is still a structure. Liana tilted her head. Not by Academy standards. He tapped a control on the wall. The screen changed to a slow playback of her movements before the storm, her gathering of supplies, her placement of stones, the tensioning of ropes. Then he paused it, zooming in on her crouched figure beneath the sheet-covered frame. Yet here you are. No tech failure, no injuries, no panic spike. You slept through it. She nodded once. He paced slowly to the other side of the room. Some of the other cadets have already filed disputes. They believe you were given an unfair advantage. That your evaluation wasn't conducted under the same expectations. Liana didn't flinch. Let them file. I didn't break protocol. He turned. You subverted protocol. She met his eyes. I adapted. He stared at her for a long time, then pressed another button. The screen now displayed her Academy profile, basic stats, species, history, evaluation scores, and family background. The last section made his eyes pause. Your grandmother survived the San Arias hurricane on Earth, didn't she? Yes. She was the one who taught you to build with soft materials? Yes. He nodded slowly, thoughtful. And she did it without technology. Just blankets, rope, her instincts. She always said, the wind remembers shape, not strength. He allowed himself a small smile, then turned serious again. Cadet Holt, do you know what we're actually evaluating during these field tests? Practical survival? No, he said, raising a finger. Practical compliance. We teach cadets to follow procedure. Standardized responses, predictable builds, because when hundreds of species coordinate in emergencies, uniformity saves lives. Liana said nothing. Her silence wasn't defiance, it was invitation. He continued. Your solution worked. Brilliantly. But it was unpredictable, unstandardized, impossible to replicate across species. We're not in the business of miracles, Holt. We're in the business of models. She nodded slowly. So you'll fail me. No, he said, walking back toward her. We're going to give you a demonstration. That caught her attention. She leaned back slightly. What kind of demonstration? One where you build the exact same shelter, under observation. This time with cadets from 5 different species watching your every move. And then, you'll teach it. She narrowed her eyes. You want me to teach survival using sheets and rocks? I want you to explain why it worked. I want the others to see that a human's instincts can be translated into useful patterns. Even if not everyone has grandmothers who fought hurricanes, Liana crossed her arms. And if I say no? The instructor shrugged. Then you'll still pass. But no one will learn a damn thing from what you did. It'll be chalked up as a fluke, a statistical anomaly. You'll get a commendation and disappear into the system. Forgotten. She stared at the screen behind him, at the blinking green dot, the only one that survived. Then she stood. When? The instructor smiled faintly. Right now. The second shuttle was already waiting. It took them to a controlled climate simulation chamber 2 decks below the Academy's primary hull. The chamber could replicate any planetary surface in the known system. Heat, gravity, terrain, atmospheric behavior. At the far end of the room, 5 cadets waited behind a transparent barrier, suited in monitoring gear. Zorath was among them. So was the Etherian. A Velkari twin stood at attention beside them, arms folded. Liana didn't recognize the other 2, a slender, amphibious female with deep blue skin and a tall, feline humanoid with sharp ears and amber eyes. The instructor activated the chamber interface. Simulating Class 5 sandstorm conditions on neutral terrain, no tech permitted, materials chosen by cadet. Objective: recreate structure and explain principles. Liana stepped into the center of the empty terrain simulator. The moment the hatch closed behind her, the floor shifted subtly beneath her boots. The air changed, thicker, more mineral. Simulated gravity adjusted to match Arask 4. The lights dimmed, casting an early dusk over the landscape. No words, no guidance, just her and the emptiness. She walked toward a crate of scavenged parts and touched each item with familiarity. Bent rods, frayed rope, torn canvas, weighted plates. She pulled what she needed and set to work, not quickly, but deliberately. Her voice, now amplified through the observation panel, filled the chamber. Step 1. Know your wind. Direction, strength, height. Most of you build up, vertical protection. That's your first mistake. Wind hates resistance. I build down. I give the wind nothing to fight. She crouched low, pinning cloth under flat rocks, shaping a half-dome against the simulated breeze. Step 2. Materials don't resist, they cooperate. I don't use nails or bolts. I use layers. Fabric breathes. It flutters, flexes. It doesn't snap. You want armor. I want rhythm. She tied 2 corners loosely to anchor rods, leaving enough slack to ripple without catching. Step 3. Don't build against the world. Use it. The slope behind me, natural buffer, the sand, insulation, the air, channel it. Everything the storm gives you, use it. The simulated storm began. Wind speed increased, particles swirled. The monitoring team adjusted their visors. Liana stepped into the shelter, finished in under 8 minutes. From outside, her voice was muffled, but still audible. You don't survive because you build the strongest thing. You survive because you understand the storm. The wind howled. Her shelter held. Behind the glass, Zorath exhaled slowly. The Etherean's eyes glowed pale green. The feline tilted her head, one ear twitching. No one laughed. No one scoffed. No one said a word. The moment the simulated storm died down, the shift in the air was almost imperceptible. Just a thinning of tension, like something massive had passed without fully touching the room. Liana stepped out from beneath the canvas with unhurried grace. Her hair was dusted with fine particles, her shirt clung slightly to her skin from exertion, and the lines around her mouth had hardened with concentration. But her expression was calm, not triumphant, just quiet. She stood in the heart of the chamber, surrounded by the echo of wind, in the center of a shelter that had endured precisely as she had intended. Every stone remained in place. Every fold of cloth had settled deeper into the simulated terrain. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. She didn't need to say anything. The observation glass hissed open with a depressurizing breath. One by one, the watching cadets filed through the arch and entered the simulation room, boots crunching over artificial grit. None of them moved toward the shelter yet. They walked in a slow arc around it, like circling the fossil of a creature too elegant to have survived violence. Zorath was the first to break from the group. He approached the structure and crouched beside one corner, running his clawed fingers across the edges of the fabric, lifting a stone, then replacing it carefully. She didn't just survive the storm, he said aloud, not looking up. She spoke its language. The Etherean floated behind him, eyes pulsating in quiet rhythm. He hovered just above the surface, head tilted. The tension balance is unsettling, organic. No algorithm predicts this configuration. Yet the stability holds. The Velkari cadet stood stiffly a few meters away, his crystalline body casting fractured light in sharp rays across the sand-textured floor. He said nothing. His silence, however, no longer seemed dismissive. It had weight now. Thought. His posture no longer reflected arrogance, but curiosity forced into stillness. The feline female stepped forward and crouched at the shelter's entrance. She tilted her head and pressed a hand into the fabric's curve, testing its give, letting it spring back beneath her palm. "You designed it like a lung," she said, her voice low and smooth. "It breathes with the storm. Expands, contracts, doesn't fight the wind, accepts it." Liana said nothing yet. She watched them from where she stood, letting the silence stretch. She knew what this was. Not curiosity, not praise. This was recalibration. This was the moment the others rewrote what they thought survival looked like. Her grandmother used to call it the second silence, when people stop laughing at your methods and start copying them. Zorath stood. He turned toward her and crossed his arms. His voice had softened. You made it look like luck the first time. It wasn't. No, Liana said quietly. It never was. The instructor entered behind them, still in uniform, his helmet tucked under one arm. His eyes moved slowly from the cadets to the shelter, then to Liana. Observation complete, he announced. Reconstruction verified. Survival rating adjusted. He walked to the center of the group and let the silence build once more before continuing. Cadets, he said, voice clipped and firm. You have all been trained to standardize survival. That doctrine remains unchanged. Uniformity saves lives in large-scale operations, but uniformity does not create innovation. What you have witnessed here today is not a replacement for your systems. It is a reminder that survival is not only technical, it is cultural, ancestral, adaptive. In this case, human. The Velkari finally spoke, his voice crystalline and sharp. Then is she being promoted? The instructor turned to him. No. That hung in the air for a beat too long. Liana raised one eyebrow. No. You're being reassigned, he clarified, turning back to her. Effective immediately. She narrowed her eyes. To where? Archival Research and Tactical Application Division. You'll work under Commander Reeve. She specializes in indigenous planetary strategies. Your assignment is to develop cross-species shelter training modules based on this demonstration. We're building a new branch of adaptive survival tactics. You'll lead the human subunit. Liana blinked. She had not expected that. She'd assumed some quiet commendation, a report filed, a return to drills. But this was different. This was permanent, institutional. Her instinct had created a new path entirely. The instructor continued. You'll be given access to primary databases and storm simulations for the next 10 planetary environments in our survival registry. You'll collaborate with engineers and analysts to replicate your design for mixed species squads. We'll assign test groups. You'll teach them. Zorath grunted. So she's not a cadet anymore? She's not, the instructor confirmed. She's an instructor. That settled everything. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, to Liana's surprise, the Velkari cadet stepped forward. His voice was slower now, less sharp. Would you allow me to see the internal structure from below? She nodded and stepped aside. As he knelt and lifted the edge of the shelter, the Etherean leaned slightly closer and asked, Would you be willing to show us the exact rope tension ratios? I'd like to replicate them with polymer strands. Zorath scratched the back of his scaled neck. I still think it shouldn't work, but if it does, I want to know why. Can I run a scan? Liana turned, facing them all. Her arms were still crossed, but her voice now carried authority, not just defiance. I'll show you, she said, but I won't hand you blueprints. You won't learn anything from numbers. You'll learn it the way I did, with your hands and your eyes. In the wind. The feline smiled with her eyes narrowed. So, we get another storm? Liana smiled back. No, you build first, then the storm. The instructor's comlink buzzed. He glanced at it and gave a sharp nod. We're clear to return to main command. Debrief complete. Cadets dismissed. As the group moved toward the exit, Liana lingered for a moment beside her shelter. She ran her fingers across one of the stones she had used to pin the fabric down, then bent to collect it. It was just a prop in this chamber, but it felt heavier, significant. She slipped it into her bag and turned toward the corridor. The hallway felt different now. She no longer walked through it as a student. Her gait was relaxed, but grounded. Behind her, the simulated storm still flickered on the chamber's suspended systems, held in pause, waiting to be summoned again. The instructors wouldn't shut it off just yet. She knew that. They would run diagnostics, simulate variables, try to understand how something so simple had performed better than their most advanced gear. And none of it would answer the real question, because the answer didn't live in data, it lived in memory. As she reached the lift platform, the lights above her blinked once, an old academy signal for priority reassignment approval. It felt strange, being pulled out of the hierarchy so suddenly, but it didn't feel wrong. She was exactly where she needed to be. The lift ascended quietly. Inside her bag, the stone shifted slightly, warm from her hand, heavy with something more than just weight. She was no longer building shelters. She was building new ways to think. Liana had always found the upper decks of the academy strangely hollow. The corridors were wider, the walls sleeker, and the lights softer, as if designed for something more delicate than survival. Officers passed without eye contact, their movements calculated, their uniforms pressed to exacting regulation. No grit, no field dust, just glass, metal, and sterile quiet. But for the first time, she didn't feel out of place. Her quarters weren't large, but they were private, an instructor's suite. The door panel blinked green as it recognized her, sliding open with a sigh of compressed air. Inside, the walls displayed reactive views of simulated environments. She set them all to static gray. No oceans, no forests, just quiet. She dropped her pack by the entrance and pulled out the stone. It wasn't anything special, just a flat, oval rock the size of her palm, pitted from years of exposure, with one jagged side where it must have broken off something larger. Yet she held it like it was something sacred. Her fingers brushed its rough edge. It still smelled faintly of the desert simulation, warm sand, faint ozone, and cloth. She set it on the shelf by the wall, precisely in the center. Her briefing materials were already waiting on the display desk. 10 planetary profiles, 32 atmospheric scenarios, and over 200 standard shelter schematics from 17 species. A digital assistant chirped politely, asking whether she wanted the models sorted by composition, species, or terrain. She ignored it and sat cross-legged on the floor. Her mind wasn't on data. It was on hands. The ones that had built, the ones that had failed, the ones that were beginning to unlearn. Zorath had sent a message earlier in the day, short and oddly respectful, asking whether she might help him modify his capsule to include instinctive flexibility parameters. The Etherian had followed up with a list of potential materials that mimicked organic motion. The feline cadet had offered to bring her 3 samples of nomadic cloth from her homeworld, each one known to respond to wind changes with subtle texture shifts. And the Velkari, so stiff in the beginning, had forwarded a partial schematic titled Holt Shelter V0.1. She hadn't opened it yet. Liana stood and walked to the terminal, then paused. She didn't want to see their replications. Not yet. What she wanted to know was whether they had understood why it had worked. The Academy's head of instruction, Commander Reeve, summoned her to the design chamber the following morning. The commander was tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that carried through metal walls. She wore no adornments, just a crisp black jacket and a silver pin etched with the Academy crest. Her reputation preceded her. She had survived 6 unshielded drop missions and once lived through a volcanic collapse without oxygen filtration. Liana entered the chamber without hesitation. Commander Reeve gestured toward a broad surface lined with prototypes. "These are the first student integrations," she said. "They tried to build with cloth. Most of them failed. Want to guess why?" Liana approached the first shelter. It was tight, stretched, taut to the point of fracture. She pushed gently on one corner and the whole structure shivered. "They still think rigidity means strength," she said. Reeve nodded. "And this one?" The second was over-reinforced, layered with too much material, weighted unevenly. The central spine was bent from pressure. They didn't trust the materials, so they tried to compensate. And this? The last one resembled hers, almost. but it was too symmetrical, too balanced. It lacked tension, tension that knew how to pull and release. She looked up at Reeve. No understanding of movement. They're building objects, not behavior. Reeve allowed herself a small smile. I read your full report. You said your grandmother taught you by storm, not by words. She didn't believe in shelters, Liana said. She believed in knowing how the wind thinks. Good, Reeve replied, because that's what you're going to teach now. Liana raised an eyebrow. Reeve tapped a panel. A 3D projection filled the chamber, dozens of cadets, across species, practicing basic constructions in a simulated Martian canyon. These are your students. 1 month, 3 simulations, no blueprints, no schematics, just guidance. If you succeed, we propose the creation of a new track, instinctive adaptation. Liana didn't reply immediately. She stepped into the projection and watched a crystalline cadet fail to tie 2 cords together, the edges slipping and snapping apart. What happens if I fail? Reeve folded her arms. Then we stop pretending survival can be taught any other way but ours. Liana turned to face her. Then I'll succeed. The first day of instruction began in silence, not because the cadets were uninterested, but because none of them knew how to ask what she knew. Her reputation had reached them before her voice did. Some looked at her like a myth. Others looked at her like a glitch in the system. She looked back at them and saw potential and fear. She said nothing for 10 full minutes, just walked between them, watched how they touched the materials, how they defaulted to symmetry, to tension, to control. Then she stopped in the center of the platform and knelt in the dust. She held up a piece of cloth. This isn't fabric, she said. It's a conversation. She tied one end loosely to a pole. Let the wind pick it up. Let it flutter, dance, and settle. That's what survival is. Listening, not building. She handed each of them a single rope, a cloth square, and a handful of small stones. No anchors, no instructions. You have 1 hour to build something that lets you sleep, and you'll do it in silence. Confusion rippled through them. One cadet opened his mouth. She shook her head. Silence. They scattered. Some stared at the materials like they were weapons with missing triggers. Others tried to build domes, ridges, wedges. But as the hour passed, failure taught more than she ever could. Structures fell. Fabric pulled. Ropes snapped under tension. Only one cadet, an amphibian girl with wide green eyes, crawled under a half-tilted panel of fabric pinned with uneven stones and simply lay there, unmoving, listening to the artificial breeze. Liana smiled. She walked over, crouched beside the girl, and whispered, "Now ask the wind what it needs." The girl closed her eyes. That was enough. By the end of the 3rd simulation, the shelters looked nothing like what the Academy had taught for decades. Some resembled nests, others looked like collapsed wings. One appeared to be growing from the ground itself, but all of them worked. No failures, no injuries, no panic. Commander Reeve stood beside Liana in the control room, arms crossed, watching through the glass as the students slept in their shelters, curled into strange shapes, listening to the language of movement. "You did it," Reeve said. Liana's voice was soft. "They did it." "Still," Reeve added, "you turned instinct into doctrine." "No," Liana corrected her. "I just reminded them what they already knew. Before tech, before structure. Every species used to survive without diagrams. I just helped them remember." Reeve glanced down at the report on the console. "We're submitting the proposal to Central. Instinctive environmental response training. You'll lead the division." Liana nodded. She felt no rush of pride, only a steady sense of direction, like something ancient had finally been put back where it belonged. Weeks later, she returned to her quarters. The shelf was just as she had left it. The stone sat quietly in the center, unchanged. But now, beside it, she placed something new. A small braid of frayed rope. Each strand had been tied by a different cadet. None of them matched. None of them were symmetrical. But when woven together, they held. She leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly. The academy would change. Slowly. Reluctantly. But it would change. Because survival was not a set of instructions. It was a memory. And memory, when shared, became something stronger than technology. It became tradition. And Liana Holt, once dismissed as a cadet with a bag of rocks and a roll of cloth, had rewritten what survival meant. Not with metal, not with fire, but with something older. Understanding.